Hello. All right. So welcome to everyone in person and folks joining us via Zoom to the Chemistry DEI Colloquium series. We have today with us Professor Sydney Wilkerson-Hill. Sydney is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry at UNC Chapel Hill, where his research focuses on methods to obtain orphan cyclopropanes, and we heard about his group's achievements yesterday during his technical talk. Sydney was born in Kinston, North Carolina, and obtained a BS in polymer and color chemistry through the College of Textiles and a BS in chemistry here through the College of Sciences in 2010. He then moved to the University of California at Berkeley, where he received his PhD. From there, he did a UNCF Merck postdoc at Emory University. During his graduate studies, Sydney was also involved in diversity initiatives such as the Berkeley Science Network and the California Alliance programs to address disparities facing minorities pursuing careers in the physical sciences. He is a co-author on an ACS Central Science article, Organic Chemistry, a retro-synthetic approach to a diverse field. His talk today we see is titled Making Bonds, Applying Chemical Principles to DEI. So please join me in welcoming our speaker.
All right, is this thing on? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, fantastic, great. Thank you so much for the introduction, and it's great to be back. I said this yesterday, I'm gonna say it again. I'm having a blast being back at NC State. I know I'm down the street now and they're making me wear like blue and stuff, and I'm hanging out with Ramses, and it's like, oh yeah, but like go Pack. All right. No, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today. You know, when I was invited to give this DEI colloquium talk, kind of sat there and I was like, man, what am I going to talk about, right? You know, but kind of what we're going to go through today is, I don't know, my trajectory is organic chemist, how we got here to some extent, what like good advocacy and you know, alliances look like, how to you know, spot potential students and how to increase diversity in one's department. So yeah, let's jump into it. All right, and I don't unfortunately have a clicker, so I'm gonna have to keep hiding behind this screen. I hope that's okay with everyone. Also, like, I think we had something up here at some point. Oh, okay. All right, let's jump in. Okay, goals for today. All right, I have three main goals. We're going to try to chronicle my experiences as African-American male in chemistry, so I'm speaking from that perspective today. We're going to kind of talk about my reaction trajectory, if you will, and how I started in Kinston and how now I'm an assistant professor. We're going to discuss some lessons learned along the way, and we'll kind of get into some impactful books that kind of stuck with me and things that I think that are really good reads if you haven't read them already. All right. Kind of my takeaway message today is actually many of the concepts encountered in chemistry can be used as a framework to think about DEI efforts. So for those that know me, like, I'm very passionate about organic chemistry. I took Orgo 1 in the lecture hall right next door with Professor Bruce Novak when he was here many, many moons ago. And so I often try to infuse chemistry into everything that I do. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so a big question I get is like, you know, how do we increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in our department? And the answer is actually real simple. You apply the scientific kind of you know, high school handout that everyone usually gets, but it's really important to think about, right? If you're really thinking about making an impact and bringing more people to the science department, one of the first things to do, because, you know, I want to emphasize, like, this is a complex issue. There's no one solution that fits all. You know, DEI is very much environment dependent, just like a reaction is, right? You kind of have to know, like, what your conditions are, what type of reaction it is to get it to work. So the first thing you do is make some observations about your department. What are your needs, your challenges? Do well? What are you struggling with? then ask questions. Once you've identified, once you've made those observations. There's a lot of research that goes into DEI efforts. I think when I feel about this, a lot of people have the idea in their head that DEI is like a social science. It's really soft, like it's not really based in fact and stuff. There's some actually really beautiful science studies that have kind of been used to define some phenomenon that happen quite frequently with DEI efforts. And those studies are, one, repeatable, and two, can be applied in different contexts too. So it's often good to know that a lot of these DEI efforts are really based in scientific studies, right? But like with any scientific study, a part of our job is really to do our research, dig into the literature, see what's known, see what's been done, see what hasn't been done, and vet that science too. It's not enough to just take somebody's word for it. We have to go into the primary literature and look for ourselves sometimes. Come up with a hypothesis that's obvious, then experiment, right? You have an idea for increasing your apartment, try it out. In facts and observation. Test your hypothesis, try some conclusions, write a report. It's always great to like disseminate what you find to the broader chemistry audience or broader DEI audience. And then start the cycle over, all right? So maybe your experiment, you start back from the beginning. So, increasing diversity in your department and learning how to be a good ally is a very rooted scientific method, and I encourage everyone to think about it from that perspective. Okay, so we talk a lot in my lab about retrosynthetic analysis and breaking up complex molecules, and I like to think of DEI sort of like this. Okay, you have a target, right? This molecule, C-rubinic acid, is actually related to Taxol, which is an anti-cancer drug. I don't think you need to know anything about organic chemistry to see this is a really complicated molecule, right? But like if you're tasked with building this in the lab, where do you start? So one might think the best way to do this is to identify what starting materials you have and work forward. But actually in organic chemistry, the best way to tackle complex problems is to work backwards. So we take this molecule and we break it into smaller pieces. And then we ask ourselves, what is the most logical way to make this piece? All right. And then what's the most logical way to make this intermediate? And so on and so forth until you now have simpler starting materials. All right. I believe DEI works the same way. It's a complex issue. But if you think about it retrosynthetically, if you begin with the end in mind, you can actually come up with a really beautiful and sometimes elegant way to solve the problem that is specific to your institution or your department. Okay, so these are not new concepts. In graduate school, this was kind of one of the books that we were forced to read by Professor E.J. Corey. It's called The Logical Chemical Synthesis, and it talks about this idea of retrosynthetic analysis. Professor Corey is a Nobel laureate. And really the takeaway message from this book is this is a certain framework of thinking, but it's actually not a new way to think. It's basically this thought process of beginning with the end in mind. So I'm sure many of you have read this book in high school, probably. How many people have read this book? The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Oh, I see a few hands. I thought I was going to see more hands. This is an awesome book. You should check it out. One of the techniques that's put forth in this book is this idea of beginning with the end in mind. So what we talked about with retrosynthetic analysis. So by beginning with the problem you're trying to solve and breaking it up into smaller pieces, working backwards, you can sometimes like solve that problem a lot easier. This actually is, not the first time this concept has been used. This is actually based on an ancient Stoic philosopher, Seneca, right? And if you kind of think about his work on the tranquility of the mind, basically there's a quote that says, let all your efforts be directed to something and let it keep that end in view. So again, beginning with the end to solve your problem. I like this quote by Dr. Stephen Covey, who said that, who wrote this book, people are working harder than ever, but because they lack clarity and vision, sometimes they're not getting very far. And I like to talk about this with my grad students. We're doing reactions where we're optimizing processes and we're trying to publish research. Sometimes you find yourself treading water, right? And I think the same thing is true with DEI. Sometimes you're trying to make your best effort to change things in the department, but you're just not going anywhere. You're doing stuff, like you're working really hard, not moving forward. All right, and part of that reason sometimes is because you're basically pushing a rope instead of pulling it. So you want to always begin with the end in mind to think about how you can solve these problems. Okay, so basically, I contributed to this study. This was really led by Professor Beth Alekwa at Penn State. This was not my idea. Okay, so I want to put that out there. But a bunch of young professors from across the country, we got together in 2020 during the pandemic, and we talked about what are the best practices to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in organic chemistry. And we actually, what we started to do is apply this chemical principle to, DEI efforts. So the question we wanted to answer was, how can we develop and optimize innovative methods for social justice in organic chemistry? So like this was basically our target product, was the graduate student, right? The person. We wanted to ultimately be able to graduate students that were honest, that had humility, that were persistent, that showed courage, strength, and were empowered, right? And were from a diverse group. So to do that, we thought backwards, like, what do we need to do that? And so we identified three major things: recruitment, retention, and inclusive work environment, because these were traditionally some of the aspects in organic chemistry that we struggle with. So, I don't think it's any secret, like organic chemistry is a tricky subject. It's hard. Most of the people I meet on the street, when I say like, I'm an organic chemist, the first thing they say is, oh man, I hated that class, right? It's a reoccurring thought, right? And it makes me think about like how we got here. How did organic chemistry become like the most hated subject of all time? I think a lot of that has to do with these three things: recruitment, retention, and creating an inclusive work environment. And I don't have facts to base this on, but my sense of the matter is in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had a certain mindset about what a PhD was and what that meant. And if you didn't have one and you were sitting in the class right now and you didn't understand what I was talking about, that's your problem, not mine, okay? But that's not the case, right? Organic chemistry is really a beautiful field and impacts our day-to-day lives. And it's our job as professors to reach out and reach across the aisle to make sure people are excited about this really beautiful subject. I think the same is true for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's up to us to really reach across the aisle and put in the hard work to bridge those gaps and make those things happen. So these are kind of our advanced intermediates. If we're thinking back to the previous slide, we had some molecules that were target, but ultimately were still complex themselves, and we can break them down into other simpler pieces. So things like increasing awareness, super important, mentorship and sponsorship, building communities, we'll talk about that a lot today, inclusive teaching practices, and obviously improved approachability. So you have to be approachable. Okay, so this is not going to be your traditional lecture today. This is actually going to be a flipped classroom. There's going to be work to do, and you're going to be working together to answer questions and solve problems. All right. So we're going to start with the hypothetical scenario. And so what I encourage you to do is, I know everyone kind of chose their seats, right? But I think part of making bonds is really getting up and meeting people you haven't met before. Think about this question. We're going to pair up with people, maybe trust. Want to meet someone new, pair up with someone across the room, and then we're going to share our answers. So here's the scenario. We met a young individual. We're going to call her Shanice. She's from rural North Carolina. She's generally excited about chemistry and would be a good fit for your program. She's got straight A's in all of her science courses, but says she wants to start a business like all of her other family members. What should you do as like a chemistry administrator? Should you push Shanice to apply to the chemistry department? What are the pros of this decision and what are the cons? Let's take about 2 minutes to think on our own about this. Let's then pair up, and then we'll share our answers as a group. All right. And I'll walk around the class because I want to hear the discussion too. So make sure you're talking. Right. This is what I was hoping would happen. We got a lot of discussion, and I think that's great. One of the cool things that came experiments related to teaching is that like lectures are really woefully ineffective at conveying information, and actually like talking and doing flipped classrooms and having people engaged, people learn materials. So I'm glad to hear that people are like engaged. So I heard a lot of great discussion, and I'm going to call on two people in the back. I'm going to start with Marlon, and then I'm going to go with Matt. Marlon, what do you think, man? What's going on? What do you think should happen?
Saying you want to do it, doing it.
Yeah, that's true. Saying you want walking in the walk, talking the talk are two different things. Absolutely. Right. Yeah. All right. Great job. Let's give Marlon a hand. Thank you for participating. Right. Anyone that's in my organic chemistry class that participates, I always thank them. Have to. Sometimes you're having a bad day, participate. I get it. All right. Let's go to Matt. Matt, what do you think?
Thank you. Sorry. In many ways, I agree with Marlon. I don't think we should necessarily be like pushing them in necessarily one direction or the other. Rather, like making them aware of the ways that chemistry might be able to benefit them and whichever business they decide they want to go into. And like in some of the ways. Also, if they're deciding to go to NCSU and want to join the chemistry program for their goal, maybe pointing them to some classes outside of the chemistry department as well, that might benefit their future goals, may benefit them as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt, for contributing. Appreciate that. Is there anyone else in the audience that wanted to like share their thoughts? I think we have time for like one or two people. Oh yeah, here. Yeah, let's go. All right, I like this.
So I just wanted to mention that sometimes we feel like our brains are so limited, but at the end of the day, our capacity is so wide. So if there's a person that is interested in two things, yes, she has to look at both aspects, but at the same time, we can recommend the availability that we have of the entrepreneurship program, as well as our chemistry department, which both can go hand in hand. There's no limit to having two persons, helping you with the things that you need to decide what you want to do later on in life. So that's the best part even about NC State, because we have that opportunity for other students to come into both avenues. And then when that person progresses, then they will know what they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's well said. Yeah, so I think this is a complicated situation. I don't, this is hypothetical, so I don't think there's a real answer, right? We'll go into kind of like a little bit of my background and kind of where I come from, and this happened to me basically. I'm Shanice, right? But minus the like family business part. My family didn't have a business, but this is complicated, right? Because like sometimes we think like DEI is simply about bringing the woman or bringing the Black person into the department, when it's a lot more. I don't know. It's more than that, right? It's about empowering communities, right? If Shanice kind of knows what she wants out of life, I think the best thing to do here is kind of show her the door and show her the opportunity, but in touch with her, This is a very complicated situation, right? But I think bare minimum, like being a good ally here is kind of surrounds this whole idea like, hey, this is an opportunity that you can do if you were interested in doing it, and I can help you. I can be a mentor here if that's something that you want to do, and you go from there. So that's actually what happened to me. So I have a bizarre story of how I got into organic chemistry. So I'm originally from Kinston, North Carolina. Anybody know Kinston? Oh yeah, I got a few hands. Okay. Anybody actually like been there? Yeah. Okay. You heard stories? Anybody heard stories? What story? You want to share a story about Kinston? No, you don't. You don't. Oh yeah, you do? You do? Yeah. Yeah. I saw a hand. Would you like to? You don't have to. Kinston. Sure. I come from a special part of that town. It's called Census Tract number 103. Okay. And I didn't, growing up, I grew up in a really poor neighborhood, right, for lack of a better word. But one of the interesting things that happened when I became a professor is I came across a study from UNC about North Carolina's distressed urban tracts. So they basically look at the whole state of North Carolina. They take all the neighborhoods, like divided by like their census region, and they split them up into urban and rural. Actually, one of the things that came out of that study is the neighborhood that I grew up, Census Tract number 103, was actually ranked as the most distressed rural tract in the state of North Carolina. And growing up, but like when you're a kid, you're not trying to have fun catching frogs. I was riding my bike, like wasn't thinking. But yeah, it's a really interesting place. These statistics are old. I think the population is still about 20,000. I think 30, maybe higher, below poverty, lots of gangs, lots of those, drugs. We're actually known for another thing. A big basketball haven. Anybody read this article in ESPN? Come on, basketball fans. Anybody know Brandon Ingram? Yeah, he's from Kinston. So they actually wrote up an article about Brandon Ingram and published it in ESPN. This was maybe a year or two ago. And actually, one of the other cool statistics about my home, produced the most number of NBA players that go per capita. It's kind of, so if you want to go to the NBA, like this is like basketball haven, but I wasn't interested in sports at all. So I had to find something else to do. Yeah, and that's where mentors come in. So this guy, his name is Professor Philip Dale. This is his wife, Sarah. When I was in Kinston, I was not on the track to do science. In my family's a military family. My mom is one of 11. I have 7 uncles and 3 aunts. And my dad's a Marine, or was a Marine. So like, I was kind of expected to go down that route, and there's nothing wrong with that route. And I was going to go into the Air Force. That was my trajectory. But like something weird happened in high school, and I wasn't doing too well in earth science because I was goofing off like kids do. And my teacher was like, okay, if you want extra credit to pass, you need to do Science Olympiad. Oh my gosh. And I like science, but I didn't want to do anything extra. I'm just trying to go home and play video games. I'm trying to play Super Smash Brothers. Like seriously, it was like so new back then. You know, and while I'm there, you know, I rock all the chemistry events because it's Kinston, nobody doing chemistry, so that's good. But I actually ran into Philip Dale. He was at the time the freshman academic advisor for the College of Textiles and also the state director for Science Olympiad. So by some dumb fortune, he's like in Kinston that day. I think it was actually like a thunderstorm the day before, and he decided to stay. And he knew that we were having our competition, and he stopped through, and he like sees me getting all these medals, and I'm just kind of like walking around, medals clanking, and I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. I got my extra credit. Yay. Can I pass the class now? And so our conversation kind of went something like this, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but this is maybe 90% accurate. Hey, you know, like I saw you winning all these chemistry events. What are you doing after high school? Me, the military, question mark. I don't know. Like, I think so. Have you thought about NC State? No, not really. Not even thinking about college. Not on my radar at all. Here's my card. Right. Basically went like that. And as a mentor, like that's what he did. He asked me to email him. He asked for my email address to keep in touch. And he kept like fostering that relationship over the next year as I finished up my junior and senior year. He went above and beyond as a mentor. He invited me to help register for classes because like I'm coming from census tract number 103. I don't know how this works. But you know, when you're interested in a subject and you have the right mentor that can kind of push you and be an ally and be and fight for you, that's how you can, you know, help increase diversity in your community, right? So it's like, you know, I'm not trying to really trivialize it and sum it up in all of these like small interactions, but they matter. It doesn't take a lot. We don't have to be like overbearing. Like programs are great. We need those. But something at a fundamental level, part of it is also kind of being in the right places where there is a need, like Kinston, North Carolina, and making those good choices and identifying candidates to push into science. So yeah, that's literally what happened, and you know, looks like it worked out. Let's see, what do I want to say on the slide? Oh yeah, how you do it matters. Okay, so yeah, this is an interesting needle to thread in science. You know, we have a lot of like old school scientists that really care about rigor and facts and truth and like the department and the field not changing. And that's great, cool. Like those are important things, and we should have them. But we also have to have increased participation and increased excitement about chemistry. It's a really weird needle to thread. And you know, I go as far to say that if we don't figure out how to thread this needle, chemistry will become obsolete. You know, it really is interesting how it's become like the most hated class, but I think a lot of this is tied up in DEI issues that we need to solve. Anybody see this New York Times article? Yeah, that made me feel kind of, I don't know, I had mixed feelings about this. Who's to blame, you know? So like, you know, Matlin Jones, I don't know him personally. He is a respected professor. He did defend the standards. I think classes should have standards. At the same time, I do feel like, you know, the traditional state of organic chemistry has been such that, like I said earlier, it's always kind of been, if you don't understand it, it's your problem. I don't know if Professor Jones was doing that here, but I get the sense that if you propagate that feeling over generations, then you get to where we are today. If you are, if we continue down this path, I really do worry about like the state of the field. So like the question then becomes, is there a way to train students, both undergraduate and at the PhD level, rigorously without turning people against chemistry? How do we change the culture of chemistry such that everyone wants to participate? And I think kind of physics does as well. I don't know why, but I feel like people are really, no, I'm shaking your head. Okay, maybe not. Scratch that. Physics doesn't do this well. I don't know. From the outside looking in, I get the sense that more people are excited about like things that we have going on in space and in Mars right now, you know. But if I don't know how many people know, like, even though we're trying to go to Mars and, you know, put a person on that planet, I don't know how many people know that we're actually sending like a gas chromatography mass spec instrument up to Saturn's largest moon, Titan, to look for organic molecules that are relevant to the origins of life. And that's a chemistry problem. So, you know, I don't know. That doesn't get really enough like attention in the news, in my opinion. Okay, so part of like improving approachability, I think, is like service in academia. And so it's, you know, going out there and meeting people and making connections and actually putting in work. Yes, we're all busy. We have busy schedules, but to some extent, like this is an important thing to do. So this is actually me at Novache. I was doing some things. This was Novache Raleigh, I think 2018. And this is me like at a resume building workshop. I was part of the professional development committee. And you'd be surprised. You look at how packed that resume building workshop is. You'd be surprised what kind of impact you can have on people's lives just by doing simple things. And so we talked about joining Novache earlier. I'm going to put in a plug for it too, because it's a great organization. I think there are a lot of benefits for joining Novache. I don't think, it's not just Black folks, although excellence is like the main goal. So if you're an ally and you support that, come join, come like help out with these resume building workshops. We need you. You know, I think a lot of people in this room are like experts at reading complex documents. You guys are smart people. So why not come and join these organizations to help? And then too, like the networking aspect is great too. These are smaller conferences usually. And so you can actually make really meaningful connections with people and build your network that way too, as opposed to some larger conferences like the ACS. So something to keep in mind, that it doesn't hurt also to just go and listen, right? You don't have to, you're not feeling comfortable, like, and you don't know enough about the struggles that Black folks are going to, just go listen. You know, that's also very valuable to educate yourself and to kind of learn what's going on. So again, it's critical to form meaningful relationships. When you're thinking about EEI stuff, it's not just about saying, hey, you're Black, come join the department. It's really about creating that, like fostering that genuine connection. And it's part of why I'm back here today, because that connection was genuine. There are also other organizations you can join, such as SACNIS and these here. So write those down because they're equally as important as Novache too. You can find your community of people that you really gel with. Okay, time for a second scenario, all right? We're going to talk about retention, right? So you notice one of your friends who's always been excited about chemistry is no longer showing up to class. When you catch up with them on the Brickyard, they mention quitting organic chemistry. What should you do in this situation? Where are some strategies to ensure URMs in science can remain in the field? So again, let's take 2 minutes. We're going to think about it. We're going to take 2 minutes and we're going to pair up, and then I will ask for volunteers. Let's do it. All right, all right. I think we're having a robust discussion. I love that. Like one of my favorite terms, like robust scientific discussion. That's what's going on right now. Yeah, you got to discuss problems, y'all. Like we just can't sit in our own boxes and not talk to each other. It's like really detrimental to the progress of us as a whole. So like talking to people, interacting is extraordinarily important. Okay, getting a little too excited there. All right, so I heard a lot of good conversation, and I was talking to Juliana. Okay, would you like to share your answer, please? Yeah. Do you think your friend should quit? How many people, sorry to cut you off. How many people think the friend should quit? Be honest. See one hand in the back, they should quit. Maybe quit. Maybe quit. All right. Is it okay? Interesting question. Is it okay to quit? Interesting. But I didn't see that many hands. No, because often, like, sometimes people get started on a path that, just like really isn't for them. And that's okay to like readjust. But I think the key here is like understanding, like making sure you have all the information at your disposal before you make that decision. So I'll kind of go, I think I have another story to share, like an anecdotal story. Let me see what's next. Oh, yeah. So we can get burned out in classrooms. I think part of like having effective DEI programs and retaining students is partly related to inclusive teaching practices, right? So one of those I think is helping students broaden their horizon. Sometimes when you're kind of like in the grind and you're doing this over and you're not getting anywhere and you're treading water, sometimes the best thing to do is kind of like take a break, come back to it, right? Maybe not quit yet, but take a break and come back to it. That was happening to me in undergrad. I was actually a Caldwell Fellow here at NC State, and I got to use my experience to go to Madagascar and teach math and science to people in the nation's capital, Antananarivo. And that was a really rejuvenating experience for me, because coming from census tract number 103, I was kind of like burned out after my first semester. So like, I've heard anecdotal stories of friends doing this too, like taking a gap year. I think that's totally fine. Between undergrad and graduate school, or undergrad and professional school, if you're just having like mental health issues, just take a break. that's okay. And, I know there's like a stigma around breaks, but like that's something that is ultimately healthy for us. So I think, part of this DEI challenge is helping to develop like inclusive teaching practices where we recognize that, and recognizing when like helping a student like broaden their horizons can rejuvenate them to do really great in your programs and to help retain them. And then there's another part of retention, which is sponsorship. Okay, so like students are there and they're in the program, making sure you advocate for them, making sure you kind of at least give them the opportunity and like convey opportunities to them. So I was really fortunate that in the College of Textiles, I was able to go to Brookhaven National Labs and do some research there. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And as part of that, I gave a poster a presentation at Oak Ridge National Labs. There's me, younger with less hair, okay. And because I had people like sponsoring me and really championing for me, I actually got to go to Oak Ridge and I won. Like I won first place in the physical science. And this is just a kid coming from census tract. Like none of this would have been possible without like a mentor like helping me get here, but also sponsors and people like supporting me and championing me along the way. So that's important to do too. Like if you're trying to develop an inclusive environment and retain people, like really genuinely being happy for people's success is extraordinarily important. Okay. Okay, and another person that did this is my PhD advisor. This is Professor Richmond Sarpong. He's like at the forefront of organic chemistry. My PhD was focused on the finding new ways to build complex natural products. This molecule here is lamivitison. It's actually an anti-cancer compound. It causes double-stranded breaks in DNA. And my PhD advisor is a world expert in building molecules that look really, really complex. So, and this is my postdoc advisor, Professor Hugh Davies. He's down at Emory. He works on activating CH bonds, which are ubiquitous in all organic compounds, anything made of carbon. Part of what helped with my retention in chemistry was the fact that I was working on problems that I felt were important and were exciting. When you are trying to get people into science and you're thinking about how to retain them, oftentimes people like get turned off from science or whatever you're working on because they don't feel like they're doing anything important. Okay, but I was really fortunate that my postdoc or my PhD advisor and my postdoc advisor actually gave me really, really, really hard problems to work on. And that was intellectually stimulating, and that was a nice challenge that I got to really dig into in those times. So I kind of wanted to stick with it. It's also good, like when you're working on hard problems, when you have that challenge, to make sure you have support too. Challenge and support are important. And the people's level of challenge and support varies. So like I tell this to grad students when they're coming into the chemistry program at UNC, like every department is different. Some departments are very challenging with little support. Some departments are very supportive with little challenge, and you have to find out where you fit into that spectrum. You got to figure out like what works best for you. So luckily I was in both of these places at the time. Like the amount of challenge and support kind of matched where I was at in my independent career. So I'm really grateful for these two for allowing me to work on some really complex contemporary problems in organic chemistry. Okay, and then mentorship, right? Mentorship is different from championing somebody, and it's different from being an advisor, right? Mentorship. Here, I am really fortunate that my PhD and postdoc advisor allow me to, better myself, right? So outside of doing service activities in Madagascar, I was able to kind of learn more about what it was like to be an assistant professor through the University of Michigan Next program, the University of Pittsburgh Nexum program. Professor Hugh Davies was really nice and allowed me the opportunity to actually go to the National Science Foundation in Arlington, Virginia, to help defend his NSF-funded center for renewal. So I got to make a lot of connections in the organic chemistry world and actually kind of put my name. And so that would not have been possible had people not recognized where you're at in your career, and like what things you need. So when you're thinking about creating environments and improving diversity, equity, and inclusion, You really have to like treat people on an individual basis and understand like where they're at in the process, and also kind of like make sure the opportunities that you're putting in, in front of them kind of match where they are for their stage of development. So that's extraordinarily important too. I always like to mention this here too, because we can't ignore money, right? Like sometimes we talk about all of these great things and we talk about like financing it, but a large part of DEI campaigns is fundraising, right? So because ultimately at the end of the day, capital can be used to have a positive impact on communities. So, if you're interested sincerely in increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, part of that involves grant writing, part of that finding people that want to fund these initiatives, and making sure that you have the capital and revenue to do that. Money can have like a really big impact in communities like where I'm from. Okay, I want to mention too, imposter syndrome is real, right? For those of you who don't know this, imposter syndrome it's kind of a phenomenon where individuals doubt their skills and talents and accomplishments, and this kind of persists has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. So I always like to mention that URMs, so underrepresented minorities, are here because they belong, and we have to stop propagating the myth that you're only here because blank attitude. Okay, so that type of attitude can increase things like imposter syndrome. So that's ultimately a bad thing. So make sure, like, when you're interacting with people that are not in your normal groups in your communities, that when they're, these people are being successful, make sure you're like genuinely happy for them, and try not to, propagate that myth, because it just causes more imposter syndrome. So that happens to be as a professor, right? Like I'm the, third Black professor at UNC chemistry department, 200-year history. And so like, there's a lot of pressure, right? And sometimes I feel like I can't do it, but, having mentors and champions and people I can talk to kind of helps me deal with that imposter syndrome. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about DEI efforts, that's a real thing and that affects people in your programs. Okay, so this is our final hypothetical situation for today. All right. We're going to focus on this idea of an inclusive work environment. Okay, so we're going to talk about our friend Sean. All right, he's not been that he's been studying alone all semester. All right, so you have a study group that you're a part of, but you did not start this group yourself, and you feel like the group goofs off mostly, but some learning happens. All right, so what should you do? How should you interact with Sean in this case if he's not doing well on his midterm exams? All right, what are some of the strategies to help us ensure that URMs feel included in their environment? So again, finally, we're going to think on our own. We're going to pair up, and then we'll share our answers. Oh, everyone's talking, so that's good. Hopefully, we're learning things. I'm gonna call on Ashton and Catherine here in the back to share their ideas. Catherine, do you want to start first? Right here in the back. Catherine and Ashton, yeah. Do you want to share? Yeah, it's okay. All right, what do we think is going on here? What should we do?
Okay, so we had like two conflicting ideas. One, we thought that maybe the friends should start like a study group with Sean and see how it goes. And the second part, we thought that Sean might not be doing well because he's studying by himself. So if he's invited to the bigger group, then that might make him feel included, and that will kind of help his self-esteem and maybe improve in class.
Okay, great. And then Ashton.
I mean, we were having the same thoughts,
Same thoughts?
but we were talking with each other, right?
Yeah, of course.
But I guess the only other thing is like, if he is included, he might hear others' perspectives of like certain topics, and so it might make things, I guess, click a little better for him, versus just being stuck in his own ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing. Okay, yeah, this is another complicated situation, right? Because like oftentimes we want to build an inclusive work environment, but sometimes like including people can come at the detriment of that person if they're like not learning. So we have to be really thoughtful about like how we include people in our environments. All right, so I think I have maybe one more anecdotal story to share with you, and then we can wrap up for today. Cool. All right, so inclusive work environment. This is like my favorite part of the whole talk. So as a point in my career, when I was here at NC State during my sophomore and junior year, like those summers, I was kind of afforded the opportunity to go to Brookhaven National Labs to actually do chemical research and radiochemistry. So I was doing like research on positron emission tomography. Everybody know what a PET is? Yeah, so that's basically the technique that we do. One, study living human brains, but also diagnose cancer. So I was like in the lab, and I was actually working with radioactive gases and trying to them into molecules. That was facilitated by Professor Jacob Booker. He's also an NC State alum. He's now the head of the Martinez Medical Center for Biomedical Imaging. Basically, what he does is study epigenetics in the living human brain. Really smart dude from Asheville, North Carolina. Okay. For those of you who don't know, Brookhaven National Labs is one of our many national labs here across the United States. This is where we have a cyclotron located, so atom collider, atom smasher. This is actually known as the RIC. They also have a really powerful X-ray or gamma ray light source called which in this old picture is currently being constructed there. So they have this. So, one of the important things I learned along the way for building communities is cohort models. I think those are excellent ways to increase and retain students in sciences and other perspectives too. Some examples of this are the Meyerhoff Scholars Program at UMBC and the Sully program at Brookhaven National Labs, but also that National Labs had a CCI internship. So they were inviting people from community colleges to come to the National Lab to do research. And that always stuck with me because sometimes like when we think of research, it's like, oh, you got to have some like real good pedigree to do that and so on and so forth. But, I think part of the reason why this program was effective is because they realized like, students like me coming from NC State, who is from census tract number 103, Black male perspective, could really benefit in being a cohort of like-minded thinking people. And that's not to say the whole program was African-American. We're still a small part, but we had the critical mass to actually start discussing about relevant issues that are happening in our community and how can maybe come together to start to solve those issues. So it's really, really energizing to kind of meet Black scientists for the first time. Okay, like I was like, where are the Black scientists at? Well, some of them were here in the Sully program and the CCI program. These people are like my friends to this day. Like this guy in the front is actually, he was the best man at my wedding. So make really great connections there from these opportunities. So really grateful for Jacob because he understood the importance as a mentor and an ally of creating a inclusive work environment. he asked tough questions and there was like rigor there too, but like he understood the importance of like putting people in situations where they can thrive. Okay, so last few things, stereotype threat is a real thing, okay? I like this book called Wisdom and Equality. I highly recommend everyone read it if you haven't already. It's really defined as the social premise that arises when one is a situation doing something for which a negative stereotype about one group applies. So there is actually a really interesting set of sociology studies that were done, psychology studies that were done in the probably early 80s, where they would give like two sets of groups, like two sets of women tests. And in one group, they would say, you know, women aren't really good at math. And they would control for all the other variables. And like the only difference between these two control groups was the fact that we told one group that they were not good at it and they would score lower on the test. And what was found is like this, came out of that is this idea of stereotype threat. And this actually applies to a lot of different groups. So, you know, gay, lesbian, African-American, women, whatever group you think of, offers actually kind of show this, like, you know, it's really interesting. Really great read to kind of learn more about this idea because ultimately we subconsciously care what others think to some degree. So keep that in mind when you are developing programs and you're thinking about how to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you don't read any other book today, read that one. Okay, so I want to wrap up. I want to give credit where credit is due because we don't do that a lot in science. Like this manuscript that was published recently in ACS Central Science, where we were taking a retrosynthetic approach to organic chemistry. It was not my, right? It was this person. When I just helped contribute to it. These are some of the young PIs across the country, some in Canada, that helped contribute to this article, which was published. And it also, you know, is an important question. Like you're going through whatever field you're in, give credit where credit is due, because otherwise people will ask the question, why participate in a field if I'm not ever going to be acknowledged for it? So don't forget that. So this is me giving credit to my coworkers and colleagues, really phenomenal group of people. Make an impact close to home. You know, I went out to Madagascar and that was fantastic. There are really great opportunities here in Eastern North Carolina where you can make an impact, start building the pipeline. Sometimes starting with small things, consistently doing small things adds up to larger things over time. So you don't have to go save all of Carolina right now, but start with small things, resume building workshops to change people's lives. And as you do that, you start to get more people interested and involved. And this becomes like what do you call it? Like a boulder that has gotten over its activation energy barrier and now it's going downhill. Okay, and then I'm going to leave you all with a quote, my favorite quote of all time, right? Like oftentimes we think about like what success is, and sometimes that causes a lot of internal conflict. I like this quote by Maya Angelou: "Success is liking yourself, liking what you do, and liking how you do it." So if either of those three things are off, oftentimes you don't feel successful. And this is really great to think about. You know, from a science perspective, anytime you're dealing with DEI, it's good to define your parameters, and success is also one of those parameters that you need to define for yourself and for students that are kind of in your program. And have fun along the way. So I met the chancellor twice. Unintentionally, here's once at NC State when I was a senior, and then once in an airport in Indiana after I became an assistant professor. So that was awesome. I don't think he realized like I was the same person from this one. All right, and so that brings me to my acknowledgement. So I also wouldn't be here today if it was my amazing research lab. This is the life force of UNC. I'm really fortunate to work with some brilliant students, both graduate and undergraduates. I'd like to thank these agencies for funding. I'd like to thank you for the attention and the invite, and I hope this was helpful in thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. So I think we do have time for a few questions. We just pause. I'll bring you the mic. You want to hold it close so we can all hear you.
Thank you for the really interesting presentation on this difficult topic. I would not have a question. I have more like I would like to hear your opinion towards it, because you're coming from this, I would say, like more like low income environment, and you now have gone the way all through to make it a professor. And I come from Germany, and the study system there is a bit different. So people here come to the university, they study here, and they are basically in a closed environment. They are with the freshmen and with the other students staying on campus, living there, and being in this community. So my question, or where I would like you to ask is, do you have the feeling that you being in this position now have an impact on your hometown? And do you think that this might be a problem to have this parallel society, or is it actually an advantage to go to university and live on campus with all the other people?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Yeah, that's a tough one. Kinston's a special place. Arguably, like, I think like athletes have a larger impact on the town than I do as a university professor, but that's not to say I have power and I can't do things. Right now, one of the things we're actually working on are actually best connect like people in academia to people in my hometown to actually address what is needed. So, part of DEI is not just like going in and like trying to help people and give them what you think is best, but really understand like what the need is. Things I'm doing is trying to work with like Kinston Teens, a local program and in the city, to kind of figure out what is the best way for synergy, if any. So I do think my my trajectory to the professoriate has had a positive impact on people along the way. Definitely a lot of African American people have kind of helped along the way into science. Ultimately, you're right. Like, it comes back to the hometown and thinking about what I can do for my community and how best to connect there. And, with this network that I've kind of built along the way, I think we're starting to think about how we can kind of tackle those questions. It's not it's not one of these things where there's one solution to solve the problem, right? It really does take a multifaceted, that neighborhood and that area of the state needs a lot of things. It's not just like bringing people into science, right? But that's what I'm an expert in, and that's where I think I can contribute.
Thanks for the talk. It's really good. Obviously, a very important topic. So I've been on way too many search committees. I get the feeling that the recruitment piece, we're thinking about diversity during the piece, but it's the retention piece for faculty that is a real challenge. So have you seen any programs at institutions, R1 institutions, that have been really successful on the retention piece for faculty?
Yeah, great question. I mean, my personal thoughts on this, I think cohort models are the best way to go. I think there are a lot of studies that show kind of like when you bring in not just one cohort at the same time, that's really correlated to these people staying into the professoriate. So I believe the same is true for undergraduate programs. The same is true for graduate programs. I always point to the Meyerhoff program at U that's been fairly successful. And part of that is predicated on bringing in not just one person for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but a group of students at the same time that can, interact and learn from each other and be trained together. I think cohorts are the way to go.
So I see two hands, so we'll have two more questions and then we'll close.
That's a great question. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I have an answer for like, what is the magic number for critical mass? I don't know. I think this is where I need to go and read more to kind of figure out what that number is. I think my understanding of this issue is it depends on where you are and place to place. Like, critical mass at like NC State is not the same as critical mass at UNC, is not the same as critical mass at like, Purdue, right? Like, so I don't have an answer for that. Sorry, Anna.
Okay, so I'm asking more so on a personal stance, I guess. I'm an international student, and I realized that the way I've learned chemistry in this country is very different from how I learned chemistry in my home country. And I would like to like form a bridge between the two. So how best do you think that we can bring what we learn here back and be effective in our home country?
Oh, yeah, that's an awesome question, you know, because like, we deal with this, you postdoc, you have like one set of skills, and then you go in a different work environment and you're expected to learn a different set of training skills, and you're like learning fundamentally the same thing, but it's like sometimes taught differently. What is the best way to integrate those two things? Let me think. I have to think on that one. Yeah, because I can't speak from the international perspective, so I don't know if I have much to say there. But I think at the end of the day, like kind of meeting, like you got to find commonality in what you've learned and how you were taught and how you can like bring that back to, you know, where you're from. I don't think directly implant, like I don't think you can just like transfer knowledge directly. It's not as simple as like copy and paste. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what you have to do is think about it scientifically. Do the research on your hometown, figure out what the needs are, and then kind of figure out where you can start to use your skill set to address those needs. It's not, like copy and paste doesn't work. I can say that, but that doesn't work. That never works. But really kind of like figure where you interface and where those skill sets align is kind of probably the best way to think about that problem. So sorry, I don't have a better answer. Yeah, great question.
All right, well, thank
Okay.
you all for your questions. So yesterday, Cindy mentioned wanting some NC State swag. So we got you. We got a couple of things here to say thank you for your visit. So let's thank our speakers.